This situation is pretty scary to be in. I don't think they can make it on this, not for very long.
I guarantee you there's a lot of crap in there because where else is your money going?
You're starting to look at the numbers and you're like, oh, it's not going as far as I thought it was going to, right?
You're just eating top ramen every night, just trying to make the budget work and pay off debt.
Welcome to Just Another Money podcast with your hosts, Lauren and Nick. We're here to take real-world money situations and break them down into actionable steps you can actually use.
Whether you're budgeting, paying off debt, or saving for your future, we're all about making finances easy to understand and putting you in control of your money. Hey everyone, and welcome back to today's episode where we are talking about budgeting. We're going to dive into some situations from real people who have been having a hard time managing their monthly income. But before we get into that, Lauren and I thought it'd be a good idea to share a budgeting tip that's been helping us stay ahead. So Lauren, will you kick things off by sharing a tip that's helped you be successful with budgeting?
Yeah, so one thing that I've been doing for years and years now, ever since I started budgeting, was checking in weekly with my budget and tracking my expenses for the week. This helps it keep it super simple and helps you actually stay on track with your budget. That's really where the magic is whenever you're comparing your expenses to what you've actually budgeted for the month. So that's my tip there, checking in weekly with your budget and going through your expenses.
Yeah, that's a great one. I would say what's made the biggest difference for me when it comes to budgeting is what I like to call getting 1 month ahead. And so essentially, whatever money I earn this month is set aside and used for next month's budget and next month's expenses. And really that's helped me in a few ways. One is that at the beginning of the month, I have all the money I need to get through the month ready for me on the first of the month. And so that means no longer do I have to plan my purchases or my bills around when I'm getting paid because I have all that money for me ready by the first. But also it's really helped me because now I know exactly how much I have to budget. And coming from being self-employed my entire career, that was always an issue for me because, when I was getting paid out from projects, my income would fluctuate and I didn't know exactly when I was going to be paid. And so my budgets were always messy. They were always built off of estimates. And then towards the end of the month, I could kind of get a little more accurate, but it didn't feel good. And it didn't feel like as rewarding as budgeting should have been. And so it's been really helpful for me as self-employed. But I've also noticed that even for people who have a W-2 income, it's really helpful because one of the issues that I always found people running into is that they would have to plan their expenses around their paychecks. And if at the beginning of the month you owe your rent and you owe a handful of other larger bills or utility bills, it was difficult to make it from maybe the first of the month through the 15th if you didn't have any extra money left over. It just made things tight. And so if you have all that money ready for you on the first, it's really easy to plan out your budget. You don't have to worry about when your expenses fall, when your paychecks come. So that's been a huge tip for me, but really excited to get into today's scenario. So Lauren, do you want to jump into the first one?
Yep. So this one says, why is it so difficult to keep a budget? I've recently started to keep a budget and I'm finding it much harder than I anticipated. Based on my salary, I decided to cut a lot of non-essential expenses, but there are some things you just can't do without. Earning additional income is more of a long-term prospect for me, so I'm looking for ways to manage this in the short run. Does anyone have any tips or strategies for sticking to a budget when it feels like there's little room to maneuver? Any advice on how to handle essential expenses without feeling like I'm constantly stretched thin?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what's really helped me is figuring out what your baseline budget number is. And so essentially, your baseline budget number is how much do I need to get through the month? So that should include things like your basic necessities. So food, utilities, housing and transportation. If you're in debt, it should also cover your minimum payments and any other expenses to get through the month. So that could be your phone bill, internet bill, childcare, or insurances, all those things. Figure out exactly how much you need. So that way once you hit that number, you're good. Anything above that can then be deployed to whatever your situation is. So if you're in debt, that money could be used towards paying off debt or saving for your next financial goal. That's where I like to start with is figuring out what is my baseline budget number.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think this person, it seems like this is just kind of where they're at right now. This is the stage of life they're in. If they're not going to increase their income a little bit, it's going to feel stretched, but it also probably feels this way because they're actually starting to budget. You're starting to look at the numbers and you're like, oh, it's not going as far as I thought it was going to, right? So, prioritize the most important things, like you said, that you need your income to cover and then cut out the rest. So, so that you don't feel so stretched, depending on, what you want to prioritize is most important. Because things are tight, continue to check in with your expenses, like I just mentioned during the beginning of the episode, and budget. So you know how much you have left to spend throughout the month, rather than getting to the end and being like, oh, I have nothing left to spend in this category, or I'm way over.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think what, you mentioned prioritizing, and I think what can really help too is to prioritize, like, let's say you write down all your expenses, put those in a priority list. What's the most important things? Those should be at the very top. I always like to start with, like I said, the food, utilities, housing, transportation. That's like kind of the bare minimum just to survive. As you work your way down the list, things are getting less and less important, so that at the bottom of the list are things like going out or dining out or entertainment or subscriptions, things like that. And if you need to make cuts to the budget, you just look at the very bottom of the budget. What is down there that I can cut? And again, if you need to make even more cuts beyond that, then you can start looking at some of your other necessary bills. Can I switch providers for my internet or my phone service? Maybe I can go something cheaper in the meantime. But I really like that if you can prioritize your expenses from most important to least important, it gets really clear on where your priorities are and also where you can start making cuts to the budget. So that's kind of one of the things that I like to do. Yeah,
for sure. I also think, this person feels that they're stretched thin. I get that. And if you have like that mindset around budgeting and that you can't spend on things, you're not going to enjoy it anyway. So you have to try to find some things, maybe for free or that doesn't cost something to do, and keep your life fun. Because if you're only focusing on the money that you don't have, it's just not going to be a good experience for you. So one time I worked with a client who was really focused on getting out of debt. And so her budget was very tight. So she would go out with friends and she would actually just have water, but she was still able to experience going out with friends and still being able to socialize, but not spend a ton of money. So that helped her. So finding those little things that can bring you joy while also, living on a tight income or a tight budget can help you push forward.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I feel like when people hear the words like I'm on a budget, like they associate that with not being able to have fun or do things that you want to do. Like first of all, there's a lot of ways you can have fun on a budget and also just for free. But I did like what you said about, like, if you're going to go out with friends, maybe just don't order as much or don't order anything. Like, you're still out there socializing. That's probably the point of it. But there's so many ways you can go out and have fun for free. Like, go out in nature more, go on walks more, like take food like on a picnic and go to a park or the beach, or, depending on where you live, like that can be a really good way to still enjoy life and live on a budget. That way you don't associate living on a budget with not enjoying life, which is kind of the crappy part of it. But this person did mention that there are some things that you just can't do without. And, I think you could make an argument. Maybe they're talking about like childcare. Like, obviously you just can't do without that if that's your circumstances. But when I first read this, I kind of just, it pushed me towards maybe this person is trying to make excuses for things that you're just like, I just can't do without it. I can't go without buying my coffee in the morning. And so I go to Starbucks every single day, or I can't go without going out with friends because I need to be social. To me, it almost sounds like an excuse for making bad financial decisions and keeping in those wants in your budget that probably should be cut. I don't know. Did you kind of get that vibe from that, or am I just like way off base here?
Yeah, I took it like both ways, that they maybe like to do some things that they don't want to give up, but also I thought like essentials that you can't live without. So, different types of cleaning supplies and, different toiletries and things like that. So I wasn't sure where they were really going with that. Yeah,
no, that's a good point. I think it just, for me, it falls into like a lot of people are like, well, I can't live without my gym membership, or I can't live without these things that granted, they're probably really, really important to you. But I think when it comes to like being very intentional with your money, we got to make a clear list. Like, what is a need and what is a want? And oftentimes I see people putting things in the need list that are more of a want, and they're like, well, I just can't live without it. That's kind of where my head was going. But yeah, we can move on to the next one if you're ready.
Perfect.
So this person wrote, my income dropped significantly and I need major help. I was previously working in sales and consistently bringing home around $7,000 to $10,000 per month. Money was never an issue. I recently took a new role at the same company, and now my pay is $23 an hour working full time. I love my new job and I'm genuinely happier with it, but the pay cut is causing a bit of fear. Before this, I was unemployed, broke, and living out of my car, so frugality doesn't scare me, and I understand that it has to be done and it'll be a new adventure. But budgeting has been overwhelming, to say the least. I've tried budgeting apps and spreadsheets, but none of them have worked for me in the past, so I'm open to any suggestions at this point. For context, I'm in my mid-20s and live alone with my cat. My rent is $2,500 per month and I just renewed the lease. I've cut all my unnecessary subscriptions, don't have a car payment, and have been trying to meal prep to save money. I have some savings, but I don't want to live off it. Please help. I'm just trying to remain upbeat.
Yeah. So this situation is pretty scary to be in. I personally do not see how they can make it month to month without diving into that small savings that they said they have. I think it's great that they're working on cutting out unnecessary spending and subscriptions and all of that, but that is not the problem. The problem is the $2,500 in rent.
Yeah.
And the fact that your income has been more than cut in half. Right. So I'm loving that they're, trying to find ways, but we really need to find a solution to that bigger problem, which is the rent being so high. So I know they just re-signed the lease. Something they could probably do is talk to the leasing office or, whoever the landlord is and find out, are they able to sublet that apartment? Are they able to move out to find something cheaper? Because I don't think they can make it on this, not for very long. They're going to take their savings down and then they're going to be in a real pickle. Or potentially get a roommate for the year, Now I don't know what happened with the job. I don't know, they said that they're happier with the lower paying job, but I don't know if that's, a long-term play. But I would focus on really figuring out the situation they're in currently so that you're able to breathe, and not drain that savings account, because that's a really scary place to be. The savings will be gone if they don't address the biggest issue, which is that rent right now. So I think that's the first thing that this person needs to try to figure out.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, I'm all for doing something that makes you happy, but there's definitely something to be said about financial responsibility. Like, this person willingly took about a 50% pay cut, if not more, right? Like if they're bringing in $7,000 to $10,000 per month, it sounds like that's after tax. That's like over at least around $100K per year. And now you're making maybe close to $50K, and that's before taxes. Like, I don't know. That's just a huge problem. And that rent is going to, it went from taking up a reasonable amount of your income. Maybe that was like 25 to 30% to now it's over 50%. And like, if you couple the rent with all the other expenses you have just to survive, like, I don't know how, like you said, this job might make you happy, but it better make you really freaking happy, because the rest of your life is not going to be as fun or as easygoing as I'm sure this now $23 per hour job is. Like, I don't know. That's just a huge pay cut to take. And like I said, you better really enjoy this job. Yeah.
And like, there's not too much this person can do other than to, I don't know. Do you get another job that tries to make a little more money? You're going to have to radically change your lifestyle, because I think 2,500 is probably more than 50% of their income. Yeah. And to even be able to eat, like, you have to be almost making, you have to be almost at that, what you're making for the month. So, it's not really a budgeting issue at this point. You can do as much as you can, but the biggest sore here is that $2,500 in a month in rent that you just re-signed a lease on, which is so sad.
Yeah. Like, I hate to say it, 'cause like, I feel like for 99% of people, budgeting is the solution. Like, you're probably overspending, in just like discretionary spending that you could probably cut out. But this is that 1% where budgeting is not going to save you, and you probably have to go and break the lease. And like you said, I feel like if you go and talk to your landlord or whoever it is, like, if you explain the situation, that person is probably better off just letting you out of the lease, or maybe there's like a penalty if you get out. Maybe it's like 1 month's worth of rent that you have to pay that you don't get back. But like, that is so much more worth it than trying to make this work when it's just, the numbers just don't line up. But like, this person also mentioned that they just feel overwhelmed when it comes to budgeting. And if you're making decent money and you can cover all your expenses, it's like, okay, that's at least valid. But at this point where you're at today, saying that you are overwhelmed with budgeting is just not a valid excuse anymore. Like, it doesn't matter if you're overwhelmed or not. You have to know where every single dollar of your income is going, because now more than ever, every dollar is going to count. And even just a few dollars here and there slipping through the cracks is going to be the difference between getting evicted and living on the street again, or living a really, really tight lifestyle with a really tight budget. So I don't know. I think this was probably not the right move. Probably could have planned this out better. Probably could have said, hey, I don't like my job, so let me work extra hard, earn as much money as I can, build up a huge savings, so that way I can put myself in a position where I can actually afford to take a 50, 60% pay decrease and I can actually enjoy my life. So not the move I would have made, even if I didn't like the job, you know?
Yeah, this person's really just in survival mode at this point, which I feel bad about. So
Yeah.
let's move on to the next one. So this one says, how do you organize your budget? I'm thinking over a few options. Should I budget by category as far as housing, transportation, utilities, etc.? Should I budget fixed versus variable expenses, or should I do it by the 50-30-20 rule?
Yeah. You know, when I first saw this question, I was like, I really love that this person's asking it because it tells me two things. One is that you're either budgeting or you're planning to start budgeting, which is awesome. And two is that you're getting really nerdy about the details. And what I've always found is that people who get nerdy when it comes to their finances, the numbers, like those are the people that really win, that really do well. So I love to see this kind of question, really enjoy the nerdier side of things. But in terms of like, how do I budget? I tend to use categories and I break it up into 5 sections of the budget. And so that's your basic necessities. I've said it before, but that's your food, utilities, housing, and transportation. Section 2 are your debt minimum payments on any existing debt. If you don't have that, you just skip it. Section 3 are your other needs. So these are anything else you need to get through the month. So that could be utilities, other bills like insurance or phone bills or internet. 4th is your saving and investing. Now, if you are in debt, this is also where I would put extra payments on that debt. And last is your wants. And, you know, like we talked about, it's really cool to prioritize your most important at the top, your least important at the bottom. And when I organize my budget this way, that's really what it's prioritizing, is that all the unimportant things that, you know, I want included, but I could do without, those are all at the very bottom of the budget. So if things get tough, I know exactly where I can cut from. That's personally how I do it. Lauren, what do you suggest?
Yeah, so I love the question, how do you do this? How do you do that? Especially like, what do you use to budget, or how do you organize your budget? That's great. You can ask me, but ultimately it's going to be whichever one works best for you. You know, some people like to get super granular. Me, I like to get really down into the deep and track everything. But you know, there's some people don't. Some people like to have broader categories that works really well for them. But ultimately you have to determine how you'd like to set up your budget. You know, regardless if however you're organizing it, it's important to check in with it during the month. And I'll say that 1,000 times probably, just to make sure that you're on track with it. So it's a really quick answer for me. You know, try a few things. This person can try the fixed versus variable expenses. They can try to do by category, but which one are they actually going to follow? I think is the best bet for them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, you know, this person did mention the 50-30-20 rule, which if people aren't familiar, that's at most 50% of your income is going towards your needs. At most 30% is going towards your wants, and then at least 20% is going towards saving and investing. And I always like to look at this not necessarily as a type of budget, but more as like a rule to see if my budget is balanced, or if any budget is balanced. I think it's a good gauge that if you're falling within these parameters, you probably have a pretty balanced budget. And again, I always like to say that 20% is at least 20%, while the other two categories are more of at most. But I think there's something to be said that depending on your financial situation, you might not have a balanced budget, and this 50-30-20 rule might not apply to you. Like if you're in debt, spending 30% on your wants is pretty high up there. I would say it's probably better to spend closer to like 5% if you're in debt, but you're going to have an out of balance budget, and more of that money is going to be going towards paying off debt. So it's a good gauge, but it's also important to recognize that depending on your financial situation, if you're in debt or if you're saving up for a really important goal, again, it's just a rule that you can look at to see if it's balanced, but it's okay to break that rule if you have a specific goal in mind. So that's kind of where I'm at. But anything else to add, Lauren?
Nope, I don't think so.
Cool. Let's move on to the next one. And like you said, I really like that this next one is kind of more in the weeds, like very specific. So this person wrote, how should I budget my $75,000 per year salary? For context, I'm 20 years old and still live at home with my parents. I want to own my own home by 25. I'm very grateful to my parents that they are generous and pay for all my needs, and I only pay for things like going out with friends or things that I occasionally want to buy. I also don't have any debt. How much of my paycheck should I set aside for my future home?
I love this. I feel like even on the past few episodes, we've had a lot of young people asking really great questions. I wish I would have asked these questions when I was that young. But the short answer for me is, as much as possible that you can save when you're living at home and your parents are basically paying for everything, save as much money as possible. You know, do whatever you can for your advantage here. So I think the biggest thing is, you know, obviously have some fun. You're young, you know, you're making great money, but set a limit for yourself. You know, you still need to budget as somebody who doesn't have any expenses there. So, you know, but map out what you want to spend on discretionary spending, and then put everything else into savings. You know, set up yourself an emergency fund. I think that's important because if you're going to be a homeowner someday, you want to have that emergency fund set up, and then the rest can go into your house fund or whatever else you need to save for. But it seems like this person is really focused on getting a home someday. So I would be taking advantage of that situation as a young person living at home for the next 5 years. Could you imagine how much you'd have saved up? You could at least have a 20% down payment, you know, depending on, you know, where you live and things like that. But that's my first take here is just use it to your advantage. Do not waste it. Do not go out and spend a ton of money. But this person's asking great questions, so I don't think they're going to do that.
Yeah, this is a great question. I'm glad they're asking this when they're young. And I would say, you know, one thing that people kind of fall into this trap of if they either don't have a lot of expenses or someone's paying for their expenses is that they give themselves like a pass on budgeting because they don't really need to, in the sense that there's not a whole lot of return on investment for the time you spend budgeting because you don't have expenses to worry about. Practice budgeting today, though. Like figure out, okay, what is the mortgage payment I want to be able to afford? Or what do rents look like in my area? What are the average costs of all these other expenses that I will have when my parents aren't paying for me? That way you can start to build out what a budget would actually look like. And now in the meantime, you could say, okay, well, I'm not obviously paying rent, so I'm going to put that amount into savings and my utilities are covered, but I'm still going to put those in my budget as like practice runs. And I'm just going to throw that money into savings. But that way you can also see what is going to be reasonable when you do have to start paying for yourself, right? Like if you get accustomed to spending $1,000 a month because you have the money on going out with friends, like you're going to build up this lifestyle around all this extra money that you have. And when you actually start budgeting because you have to pay for your own expenses, like your parents aren't helping pay your way anymore, it's going to be really difficult to go from spending $1,000 a month to now only spending maybe $200 a month on going out because you just can't afford it anymore with all these new bills. That would be the biggest thing. Practice your budgeting now, get in the habit of it, and add in the things that are going to be important to make sure that you're setting yourself up for long-term success.
Yep. I think that just about covers it. Let's jump into the next one. So this one says, my budgets never work. How do I make a budget that works? I don't really know how to describe the situation, but I simply suck at budgeting. I don't buy random toys, clothes, crap, and I do go to thrift stores when I need stuff around the house or clothes. I don't feel like I waste a lot, but I know I do because it doesn't matter how much money I'm making, I always seem to spend it all. Does anyone have any really simple, solid advice on how I can start a budget and stick to it?
Yeah, I mean, this person's clearly not tracking their expenses because they were like, I don't buy all this crap, but also I probably do because I don't know where my money's at. Like, you are definitely not tracking your expenses. And I think that's probably the best place to start. Figure out where all of your money is going. Like, you may be budgeting, but I mean, honestly, like a budget is literally just a plan on paper, and it doesn't have any power if you're not coupling that with tracking your expenses. If you actually can track your expenses, then halfway through the month, when you have to go to the grocery store, you have to make a purchase, you know exactly how much you have left to spend within your categories. And there's no second guessing of where did I spend this money? I have no clue. But in terms of where this person should start today, like I would 100% like print out your latest like credit card statement or your debit card statement and just highlight every single unnecessary purchase that was on there. I guarantee you, like you say, I don't spend money on crap. I guarantee you there's a lot of crap in there because where else is your money going? That would be the first step. Just highlight everything, figure out what are the focus areas for when you do start budgeting.
Yeah. And it's funny because when people say they suck at budgeting, usually that means like one of two things. You're right. They aren't tracking their expenses. So they set this budget and then they're just like, oh, I can't budget because I'm not doing it well. And it's like, well, you didn't track your expenses. Like you have no idea where your money's going. Right. But the second thing is sometimes I see them setting up like unrealistic budgets. So let's say you're just starting to budget for the first time and you're spending, normally you spend $1,000 a month on eating out. And so the first budget, you're like, I'm only going to spend 100, and then you suddenly you don't become a new person because you're you've set up a budget, you have to be a little bit realistic here and slowly, set those goalposts, down the road if you do want to change those behaviors and habits with spending. But yeah, so this person obviously just needs to set up a budget and then check in with it. I would say for this person, at least weekly. So I like to do it on Sunday morning. I'll just go through all my expenses. It takes about 15 minutes max with a cup of coffee. I will put everything into my budget and see where I'm at left with that category. So say I went out to eat a few times that week, I'll say, oh, I only have like $100 left to spend for this month on food or eating out. So that's a good way to look at it. But if you just set up a budget and don't do anything with it, you're obviously going to end up like this person, which is what I think a lot of people do.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it so many times in the past where someone is spending an absurd amount on going out and then they cut it to almost nothing. And they maybe make it a couple weeks and then they just break. And then the next 2 months are just terrible. And like, I would rather see you go from spending $800 a month on eating out to spending $300 on eating out, which is still a substantial amount. Like you can really stretch that in a month, as opposed to going from $800 down to $50, which you're just going to fail at. Like, set yourself up for success. I like what you said about slowly move those goalposts, right? Like build up the momentum for yourself. But I also think there's something we said about budgeting with a purpose. I think a lot of times people create a budget for the sake of creating a budget. And I don't think that's really like the point of budgeting. I think you should have a purpose behind why you are budgeting. And it could be paying off debt or saving up for a home or going on a vacation, whatever it is. It's hard to just get motivated around budgeting just because I created a budget. I feel good about it. It's like, no, I want to gain more control over my money. I want to feel better. I don't want to feel stressed when I open up my bank account, or I want to go on this really nice vacation, or whatever it is. Have a purpose. So that way with your extra money, you can allocate it towards something that matters. Then making your lifestyle fit within those categories is a lot easier because there's purpose behind it. You can say, this sucks that I can't go out to eat. It's Friday night, but I'm going to love it when I go on that vacation, or I'm going to love it when I can finally not feel the stress of having all this debt hanging over me, or whatever it is. Like, I think it's so important to always have a purpose behind why you're budgeting.
Yeah. And I have a good example of that. So I was working with a client and, she was finally getting on a budget. And then she started to get so amped up about her budget because she was trying to pay off credit cards, that she started taking money out of her food budgets and her going out and all the fun budget, and she would put it towards her debt. So like, she had a purpose for budgeting, and she was getting more aggressive with her debt payoff and taking away from those other things, for the reason of, being debt free. So I think you're right. You do have to have a purpose with it, or it's just like, what are you doing? So.
That's a funny example. Cause like you were probably on one end of the spectrum, and then you went all the way to the other end, which probably isn't healthy. Like, you maybe need to go on like the more frugal side, but that's like you're just eating top ramen every night, just trying to make the budget work and pay off debt. Like, that's a little much, but I love where that person was at though with the mindset. Yeah. Cool. So let's move on to the next one. I really like this one because I feel like I've come across people a lot who have said this. But this person said, "Why should I bother budgeting? It seems unnecessary since I consistently make more than I spend each month. My monthly expenses are always consistent and predictable. Plus, I've been saving enough through my 401k to build wealth. Why should I even bother budgeting?"
Yeah, I love this question. Listen, I don't mind if you don't want to track all of your expenses. I don't think in the long term you have to. I think when you first start budgeting, something you should do is track all of your expenses just so you know exactly where your money's going, because I think a lot of people don't realize it at first. But for this person, having a loose budget might be nice just to make sure you're hitting some money goals like outside of your 401k. Maybe, I don't know, this person doesn't say, but maybe you need to save up for an emergency fund, a travel fund, a future car fund, like whatever you need. But if you're just kind of letting it come in and letting it go out, and you're just, you're not going into debt or anything, you're just like, oh, okay, I'm good. But you might not be hitting any of your other goals just because you're living off of what you're bringing in and you're not going into debt for it. So I think that's something that having like even a loose budget could, benefit you for. I find again that people can, often cover their expenses, but they still are not spending and saving like they want to be. Yeah. So if this person were to actually look at all their money, sure, they're saving in their 401k, but like where else do they have savings goals outside of that 401k? Or are they really just spending everything they have coming in, but they're making it work? So I would challenge this person to look at that and see if there's something that they could potentially add if they were just tracking or just budgeting loosely. So.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people associate the word budget or being on a budget with being broke or not being restricted with how you spend your money or being forced to be frugal. And I always tell people, like, I challenge them with that. Budgeting is just about being intentional with your money. It's a plan to be intentional. And I think if you want to build wealth, you have to have a plan for every single dollar of your income. It's not about restricting your spending. It's not about saying, oh, well, I can't buy this because I'm on a budget. It's literally, what is the plan and am I going to stick with it? And budgeting is one part of it, but tracking your expenses is another part of it. But I get it. If you get to a point where you're making a good income and you're consistently spending less than you bring in, you always find yourself with a little extra money at the end of the month. You're maxing out your 401k or whatever it is. I get it that there's probably less like ROI on the time spent budgeting, and it probably feels more like a chore than it does something that's useful to advance your finances. I think for a lot of people, you got to get on a budget. If you're in debt or you have problems with spending, absolutely. But if you're at these kind of later stages of your financial journey, you're out of debt, maybe you own a home, like you've reached some financial goals, you're funding your retirement. It's like, what's the point of budgeting? And I really like what you said, Lauren, of following like a loose budget. And what I recommend to people who are in that is figure out, again, how much do you need to cover your monthly expenses? Like if you can set aside $5,000 and without even thinking about it, without having to track your expenses, you can spend all of you can make all of your purchases throughout the month and you're going to be within that 5,000. Cool, you're good. Set that money aside. You don't even have to think about it. Don't have to track your expenses or whatever, but then make a plan for what you're going to do with every dollar above that. And I think that's where the intentionality really comes in, because if you're just kind of going with the flow, like you're not going to gain traction, you're not going to make progress. But if you can make a plan for everything above what's going to cover your monthly expenses, then you can start seeing, okay, how long is it going to take me if I want to get a new car? How long is it going to take me if we want to buy an investment property or go on this nice vacation, whatever it is? Because I don't think it's enough to say, I'm putting enough money in my 401k, like I'm going to be good. It's like, is that really the only goal? Like, how do you know if that's what's going to be good? Like, have you done the calculations to figure out how much you are actually going to need in retirement? Because part of that is also having a budget, knowing what your monthly expenses are. That way you can actually plan out that number. Like, I get it. You probably don't need to be on like a tight budget or a very intentional budget in the sense that you don't have to track everything, but you should still have a loose budget to kind of guide you month to month,
Yeah, exactly. And again, I would challenge this person to just map something out just to see if they really are as good as they think they are. Because I bet there's going to be some discrepancies there in what they think they're spending.
Yeah, absolutely. Lauren, I wanted to share this statistic with you, and it was really surprising, actually. This was done by Saveology, and this statistic reads that 72% of households do not have a written financial plan. And so what that means is that only 1 in 4 Americans do actually have a proper financial plan to help them navigate their finances. And this Saveology survey also found that households with a plan are 2.5 times more likely to save enough for retirement. So I'll link the survey below, but I want to get your take on that.
Yeah, this doesn't surprise me. It reminds me of that last scenario we just had. Yeah. You might be getting by, but my guess is that you have a very messy approach to your finances. And you might have some goals, but are you accomplishing them? Probably not, just because you're not really sure where things are going. I think Benjamin Franklin said the quote, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. Yes. So that is super important with your money. So I want people to know where their income's going, all of their expenses, and then I want them to have savings goals, short-term, long-term, retirement, all of those things. Because if you don't have anything you're working towards or you're not paying attention, it's just going to come in and go right back out. So that's my initial take on it.
Yeah, I really believe that at the core of every financial plan should be a really solid budget. And like I said, it's not about restricting your spending or being frugal or not being frugal. It's just about being intentional with every single dollar you have. And I think a lot of people kind of conflate what a budget is to be this big complicated thing. And like, I don't know how to budget. It should be simple, but it also is actually really simple to put into place. And so I just have a few steps for if you've never budgeted before, or you haven't budgeted in a long time, just start out by writing out what your monthly income is. After your taxes, after any other deductions from your paycheck, write down what your monthly income is at the top of the page. Then just start listing your expenses down in a list. What is the most important? I'm going to put those things at the top. What's the least important? I'm going to put those things at the bottom. Now, if you have extra money after you've written down all your expenses, figure out what that total is, subtract it from your income. If you have extra money, just make a plan for it. And it could be paying off debt, saving for another financial goal, investing more for retirement, or whatever it is. Like, have a plan so that you can have purpose behind your budget. But if you find that your expenses subtracted from your income, it puts you in the negative, you have to start making cuts. Like, you can't go in the negative every single month. That's how people get into this trap of credit card debt. You have to make a plan. But if you find yourself that you're in the negative, just start cutting from the very bottom of your budget. Because like we already did, we organized it most important to least important. You know you can make cuts at the bottom of the budget. I think people make it overcomplicated. They build up this idea of what a budget should be. Keep it super simple. Like, you don't have to get crazy with it. It doesn't have to be fancy, you know?
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that wraps up this week's episode of Just Another Money Podcast. I want to thank you all for sticking around with us. And as always, just one simple ask. If you found value from this, just share it with a friend. That's the best way that you're going to help us grow.
Yeah. And if you want to have your money questions answered on the show, you can email us at justanothermoneypodcast@gmail.com or send us a message through our Instagrams, which are linked in the show notes. And don't forget to join us on another episode of Just Another Money Podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations provided on this podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute professional financial advice. Any financial decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are your responsibility. We strongly recommend consulting with a licensed financial advisor or other qualified professional before making any significant financial decisions. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that we are not liable for any financial outcomes.